Real Men of Real Estate with Steve Matley, construction manager and real estate developer, business owner, and educator.
Did you know that right now there's 22,000 units deficit?
Tunde Ogunwale, real estate development professional, Naval Academy grad, and veteran with a deep understanding of the public sector process.
All of us want to live in thriving communities.
Brian Fox, real estate expert and investor, dedicated to helping hundreds of clients make money in real estate every year.
There's so much housing going in.
The builders are begging for more land.
Future company can come in, lease up space to employ those people who are living in the homes.
We have to put the housing in place.
That either have to have houses,
They want to make sure that there's a strong employment.
logistics centers, things like information hubs. We are a shipping economy now. There's economies all over the country where their prices are doubling and tripling.
Hi, and welcome to Real Men of Real Estate. I'm Steve Matley, your host. Today I'm joined again by Tunde Ogunwale and Brian Fox. Welcome, gentlemen. Today we're going to talk about how do you add value to commercial real estate. And of course, our go-to expert on commercial real estate is Mr. Tunde Ogunwale, as he works in that sector. Tunde, tell us some of your ideas of how you add value when you're working in commercial real estate as an investment.
You know, one of the things that first comes to mind, and we talked about this in previous episodes, is boosting square footage. So the example that I'm going to use is more an industrial facility, and for ease of convenience, we'll say it's 300,000 square feet warehouse that's out in outside of the urban core. Usually, you're really adding a lot of value if you could increase the square footage and the dock positions. So in industrial, that's a big thing, getting increase square footage in the dock position so that you could bring more trucks to the facility in and out and have greater throughput and utilization. So that's one area that I think some people don't always focus on. Boosting the square footage and increasing the dock positions is a big place where you could add value. Something that also goes into that square footage area on a lot of the older or functionally obsolete warehouses, trying to boost the office square footage. Some of the buildings that we look at that are existing that are maybe 30 years old or functionally obsolete, they'll have a limited amount of office located in one of the four corners of the box. And so if you could bring offices on 2 corners, 3 corners, or all 4 corners so that a future tenant could better utilize this space, that's one area that really pops in terms of making it more marketable. Some of the comments that were talked about in a previous episode where we focused on cleaning the space and making it more light. That's one thing, light and bright. So if the existing warehouse doesn't have a lot of skylight, bringing in enough skylight where you get 2% skylight, 3% skylight, so the warehouse just looks brighter, and you're cleaning that slab, and you could amend the slab so it just the deck itself looks better. Those are ways that from a perception standpoint, from a usability standpoint, future tenants really see that you could add a lot of value. I want to kind of ask you, because you've worked on some other commercial projects. I don't know if you've worked on big boxes much, but I know that you've worked on a couple. Are there any other thoughts that you wanted to kind of build on from this utilization of what's existing on the footprint?
Yeah, with commercial, one of the issues is not just area for the physical structure, it's area around the structure, as you mentioned, truck circulation.
Right.
So you could be even in a commercial that's more of a retail type setup, big box retail stuff. You still need to get delivery trucks in and out, not just for the anchors, but for the smaller stores too, where they can easily pull up and handle things. So that there's a clean circulation without any kind of congestion or problems, and truck drivers aren't backing things out and that kind of stuff. You want to make it a nice throughput. Another thing that I know is parking areas are sometimes very important for commercial, depending on what it is. Now, for industrial warehouse stuff, the parking is really going to be for employees and workers of it. But when you get into retail commercial, obviously you need parking that is convenient and accessible and easy to handle for the customer base that is going to be showing up. And I know people think retail is dying. It's actually shifting. It's not completely dead on the brick and mortar at all. Some is actually growing, especially on maybe the entertainment and food service side of commercial nowadays. But again, people need to be able to access it. So if you can add parking and square footage for delivery vehicles and those type of things, you can really increase the value, make it.
That's a great point. And especially, let's use that big box industrial and then break it down to some of the other commercial product types. So in big box industrial, you're using 300,000 square feet. Generally speaking, out here in our market in the Inland Empire, and that 300,000 feet, you think that it could accommodate about 300 employees or so. So you want to have somewhere in the neighborhood of the high 200s to 300 parking stalls for that size footprint. When you drop down into office spaces, some of the traditional office users, and this is changing now given what's happening with office utilization, but 4 per 1,000 is a thumb rule that you tend to hear. Some of the IT spaces or the more demanding or more intense office users would go from 4 per 1,000 up to 5 per 1,000, as high as sometimes 7 per 1,000 square feet. So making sure that you have that much parking, or you can provide that much parking through nested parking solutions, shuttle service, or actually reconfiguring the existing stalls. That's a big value add, and that's something that sometimes is overlooked when people are marketing office spaces. So yeah, that's a great.
Sunday, let me ask you a question. So to get an idea and wrap my head around the value add, is there a market to flipping or improving these properties that has a good enough margin to make it worthwhile?
Great question. So I would say with an existing big box, I don't see a lot of quote unquote fixer flips. There are venture capital and there's groups like Blackstone and others who are sophisticated where they're looking at existing assets. They hold them a little bit longer. So it's not quite the fixer flip 6-month, 9-month, 12-month model and put it back on the market. But they do hold those assets for maybe 2 years, 3 years and try to put it back on the market for an existing facility. Where you do see kind of the value add, and Steve really works a lot on this, is the let's say there's a small building on a larger site, and from an entitlements perspective, you could boost the entitlements, get a more intense use on that land, scrape the building, and then put that back up on the market with improvements or without improvements. We do see a lot of that activity. You don't necessarily see an existing structure 200, 300,000 and somebody fix or flip and get it right back on the market. Usually it takes a little bit longer for that investor to hold it, to maybe re-tenant the building, put in more improvements, not just to the building, but utility improvements for those old projects.
What if you change the use? What if you, instead of changing the building itself, you worked on, like you said, the entitlements and the use? Like if you went from shipping and receiving to something like, I don't know. I think something's going to, you'll have to tell me, but I think agricultural is going to be something that comes to industrial.
Well, I would say that actually I work on a lot of projects that have maybe a rural residential designation. It's a low intensity use. And then we come in and try to bring in light industrial, manufacturing, and just that entitlement process. And Steve, this is kind of an area where you see a lot of value add. I would say there's a lot of value in that process that can, depending on the jurisdiction that you're in. We're in Southern California. When it comes to industrial, it maybe takes a little bit longer than some other planning and zoning improvements, but still that could be done relatively quickly, 12 months. Yeah.
I know, Tunde, a lot of the projects you're working on are in the same areas I'm working on. I'm doing more residential R1 stuff, but we're both starting with land that was in towns that were very agrarian up to 30 years ago. Maybe even more recently. It was dairies, it was alfalfa farms, it was orchards, it was, turkey ranches, whatever. It was the Southern California wineries were out there to a large degree. And those were large tracts of land. And you're right. So a lot of them are still, their general plan designation is the cities want more industrial, more commercial, or even more residential sometimes, but the current zoning is still agriculture or very rural. And so you can get a lot of add. The other thing is, you can do something along the lines of taking an existing, let's say you take an existing commercial property that's a small strip mall. You can scrape that and do a mixed use complex on there where you add a residential component to it because housing is a shortage issue. So now you're actually doing a commercial structure with residential interiors at this point. And there's that crossover there.
Right. And I got to tell you that example that you gave, I want to draw it out because that's a great value add, right? A lot of people are looking at strip centers, retail locations, and they're saying, well, what's going to happen in a couple months right now in this season? And if you're able to go from an entitlement standpoint and be able to have a mixed use project where you can have condos over offices, condos over retail, that's a great value add. And that's an area where a lot of people maybe overlook how much potential is there.
And you don't even have to build it out. Actually, if you can get the entitlements on that and sell the existing property with that ugly old building on there and the entitlements, the developers will come in and grab that in a heartbeat.
2x and 3x of what was existing just by doing the paper entitlements, getting the authorizations to be able to build on that. That's a great value add.
Another thing you can do is you can take an existing commercial building and you can or a complex, and you can cut it up into office and or commercial condos and resell the individual spaces to people, as long as you provided the necessary division, dividing walls, the fire breaks and those type of things, and access egress stuff. If you can provide that, now you've turned something that is a single box for a single user that may have been a warehouse at one time or something like that, and now it is something you can sell off as business park condos to individual investors who will then tenant them out or use them.
So those are great examples where the parcelization and the way that you're adding value is by breaking it up and adding value in smaller pieces. I think that's a significant part. Going back to kind of, Brian, your question, because I think it's a great one, and it's maybe a distinction between residential and a single family residential and maybe a big box industrial. It's very rare that you would see a big box industrial and an existing owner try to partially modernize, throw some paint on it, add some glass and glazing, open up the lighting, and put it on the market and think they're going to get a lot of value. You're either going in pretty hard and you're really modernizing it for new standards up to new current codes, or you're not. So it's really more kind of an not all or nothing, but it is a more significant investment, and it's a strategic investment. It goes back to the point of the cost benefit analysis. In the industrial space, you're really seeing a little bit more sophistication. If you do partial, you're not going to get a big value add. It isn't just throw some paint on the walls and maybe change the glass and glazing and put it back on the market. You generally don't see a big pop doing it that way.
And there's some things, if you're an investor in that commercial market and you want to manage it instead of selling it over, you can actually create a solar farm on the roof of very large buildings. You're talking a few 100,000 square feet of warehouse space. That is a great spot to lease out your roof for a solar use, and that's a great residual income.
One way to do it, right? So we're talking about, a lot of people talk about sustainability. So utilizing the rooftop to be able to have solar there, and a future tenant no longer has to pay the utility provider because much of their power source is there. I think that's one way. Cell phone towers, you probably see that as well, bringing cell phone towers and monetizing by having cell phone towers. I think that's one way. Harvesting stormwater on your site to make it better and more efficient from a utility standpoint. Future tenants will appreciate that value. So you'll be able to boost your value in those ways.
Yeah, and all these are great ways to add. Now, we want to say the average investor that would do a residential real estate investment probably is not doing commercial unless they have joined a group and they're in REIT, they're in some kind of a syndication or something like that. Right. But there are people out there that may be listening to this that are in that realm of actually doing commercial real estate. It's a little bit higher realm. Obviously, it takes more money. And as Tunde said, this is not just as simple as we're going to do some cosmetic fixes. You need to really do your due diligence and know you have to acquire the land and the structures, and you have to make significant capital improvements. But if you do it right, you can really clean house on the backside, either by leasing it out or by selling it.
And for people who are maybe exploring this in commercial, because they're saying to themselves, maybe they've had some success, they've done some residential and they're looking for other product types, and commercial comes to mind. They're seeing some distress in retail around them. I think one of the good rules of thumb is, one, you do want to talk to experienced brokers in your market, right? So this isn't one where you just sit at home and you came up with a great idea. This is one where you reach out and you start looking for experienced brokers. You try to find out from other sophisticated tenants who might be using your space or could be looking at space in a couple of years out, getting their input. It is more of a team game when you're looking at the commercial space and specifically industrial, but it's definitely exciting, and you can make significant double, triple digits on your money in that area in value add.
Now, there's one commercial project that I can think of that a more moderate investor could probably get into and actually create a cash flow situation, just like if they were buying homes or apartment buildings and then creating tenant, and that would be commercial land where you put a storage facility on it, storage lockers. And that is the very basic commercial property. It's very simple construction. It's usually on acreage where it's a little less expensive because it's in the outlying areas, but there's a certain market. You need to understand the market and don't go do it blindly. I know what you're doing, but that's something that is accessible to people that could get into major industrial buildings.
That's a great example. That's a great example. And I think there's a strong demand for that too. So that's an area where people could definitely start looking.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to wrap this discussion up. Tunde, I want to thank you for your input, and Brian for your thoughts on this. Adding value to commercial real estate. This is actually episode number 3 in a 4-part series of adding value to real estate. Please go to our website, go to YouTube, check us out, realmenofrealestate.com, or on YouTube, look for the Real Men of Real Estate channel. Also on Roku, Building Solid Foundations channel, you will find some of our Real Men of Real Estate episodes on there. This particular series will be on our website and on the YouTube series. I encourage you to look at the whole series if you have any interest at all in how to add value to real estate, and check out our previous series if you like commercial real estate on the ABCs of commercial real estate. For Tunde Ogunwole and Brian Fox, this is Steve Matley for Real Men of Real Estate saying goodbye, and make sure you check in next time for part 4.